Welcome to the Debunking Economics podcast with Professor Steve Keen. I'm Phil Dobbie, and the next big recession is our subject today. 1975, 1982, 1991, 2009, four big recessions. Add the dot-com bomb in 2000, and we've had a significant global economic downturn every 7 to 9 years. So on that basis alone, we're due another one, even though it doesn't feel like we've fully recovered from the last one. So are we ready for the next big one? That's today on the Debunking Economics podcast. So Italy is in recession. Turkey is likely to be. Germany is as close to it as you can get. And in the United States, the National Association for Business Economists has surveyed their members, and the majority predict a US recession by 2021. Here in the UK, well, we've been enjoying quarterly growth around 0.5% a year. That's now below 0.2% a quarter. So not quite a recession, but maybe we're heading that way too. In fact, look a little over a year ago back, and the European Union as a whole was seeing quarterly GDP growth around 0.6% per quarter. Now it's down to 0.2%. And what of Australia? Well, it's been seeing some of the highest growth in the Western world, over 1% growth in the first quarter of 2018. But could it be heading for a recession too? It seems like right now they're a long way from it. So, Steve, the world economy, it seemed to be traveling all right in the early part of 2018. Now recession seems to be breaking out all over the place. What's changed? Some would argue it's Donald Trump's trade spat with China that has a lot to do with it.
I think that's about as relevant as the smoots were the tariffs back in 1930, 31 or 32. The crisis was caused by the collapse of the stock market and the levels of private debt back then. And then the smoots were what I think just was a sort of a side effect, which everybody who doesn't want to admit the role of credit blame, but it's fundamentally the credit dynamics that caused the Great Depression. And we're just in a similar aftermath, and it's not realised by most of the policymakers. So this is one reason when I wrote Can We Avoid Another Financial Crisis? The way that I characterised the world was breaking it into two types of nations. The walking dead of debt, who already had a debt crisis and was sort of stumbling on afterwards, and the zombies to be, which were countries like Australia in particular, also Canada, which avoided the crisis back in 2008, but set themselves up for not necessarily a bigger one, but a one with a bigger level of private debt when it finally bursts by borrowing their way through the last crisis.
And yet, as I said in that introduction, Australia seems to be the furthest from it in that they've got, growth so much higher than most other parts of the world. Obviously ignore China, but of the Western world, they've got higher growth than most at the moment.
Yeah, but that was the same state for America before 2007.
Yeah.
This is when these things turn, and this is actually a very, very nice piece of work I saw done by a guy who's a stock market analyst, using my ideas to make a prediction about when turning points would occur in the stock market. And what he did was take something that I've done the theoretical work and what I haven't tried to practically apply it, and that's the impact of changing distribution of income and when a boom and a slump will occur. And the basic story is that when you have wage growth starting to rise, he's done the empirical work, rising to the order of 3 or 4% in after inflation terms, and employment rising at the same time. That's a prelude to a turning point, because that then, along with the amount of money that bankers are getting out of the level of private debt, that's a deduction from profit, and that's when you start seeing a profit downturn.
Right.
And he's used that very nicely to pick turning points in the American economy, and also turning points in the stock market using an analysis. Just to finish the plug, I'll just go and check what his name is. Hang on a second, because he subscribes to me on Patreon, and I thought I'd better return the favour.
Right, but while you're looking for his name, that's not happening right now, though, is it? Because
it is to some extent, yes.
But we're not seeing wage. I mean, wages are pretty flat. I mean, certainly in real terms, they're not growing at 3%.
They're starting to take off in America, and part of the reason is because you're finally getting a tight enough labour market that rather than workers being able to demand wage rises because they have trade unions, which used to be the case in the past, because the trade union movement has been completely annihilated in America in the last 30 or 40 years, and workers, actually to quote Paul Samuelson, are cowed by a resurgent corporate culture. And there's no way workers are going to go knock on their boss's door and say, I want a wage rise, because what you get is a ticket out the door. But what actually gets to the point where they simply start running short of staff, and then to attract them in, then firms start offering higher wages to try to pull, the remaining pool of people not in employment who are feasible for it into the workforce. So I think you're seeing a sudden sharp jump in the wages share happening in America. That seems to be occurring right now. And if that continues, then on this guy's analysis, which is based on my analysis, with a change of distribution of income, you'll have less investment taking place and the economy will start to slow down.
So you're sounding like a central banker now, Steve. I hate to say that, because you're saying, yes, we just need to, the employment market is tightening. We just need to see evidence that wages are increasing, and then we, that's when we have to moderate the economy. That's what central bankers say.
You're off my Christmas list pretty quickly.
No, but I mean, that's what you're saying, though. You're saying exactly what they say.
No, what I'm saying, not everything a central banker said is wrong. And what they've been waiting for is the Phillips curve. This is the whole argument that there's a relationship between the level of economic activity and the level of inflation. And when you look at that argument, they have bastardized it for a long time because they don't understand Phillips' own original research on this, where he was trying to build exactly the same sorts of dynamic models that I'm building now using Minsky. But he did have this idea of a menu trade-off, which implied a stable trade-off between unemployment and the rate of inflation. No, he wasn't talking about that at all. He's talking about a dynamic process where the capacity of particularly workers, but also raw materials producers, to get higher prices was a function of both the level of unemployment, which is an indicator of the level of economic activity, and its rate of change. And a third factor as well, which was offshore inflation. So that I've always accepted that particular concept. But when you look at it and say, why hasn't that been rebound this time around? Partially, it's the depressing impact of the level of debt on workers' incomes. There's a very direct relationship between the two, which again I've established using my complex systems approach and my Minsky software as well. I'm writing that right now for a French magazine on the issue of a debt jubilee. So there's that dynamic going on, which suppresses wage demands. But at the same time, what that means is you're going to go longer and longer into a booming economy before rising wage rises cut in, right? Because the workers can't do it. If there's trade unions, the workers could do it ahead of schedule, and by demanding wage rises. And there'd be a more gradual turning point in the economy. But the more we eliminate trade unions, the less bargaining power workers have, but they still have it when unemployment gets really, really tight. So I think we're going to see a spike in that inflation rate courtesy of wages, not a gradual increase, but a spike.
So it's all starting to turn. And you know what? That is just the beginning of that discussion. If you want to hear it in full, then you need to become a supporter of Steve Keen on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Prof Steve Keen, and all the money that you pledge will go to support his research into an alternative to conventional economics. And if you pledge more than $10 per month, then you get access to this and all the other podcasts in this series. Or you can go to debunkingeconomics.com and choose one of the subscription options on that website as well. I'm Phil Dobbie. Hopefully we'll see you back here again with Professor Steve Keen for the full episode. Thanks for listening.